Hi everyone! So today I'm going to be taking you guys through a complete Schismatoglottis plant care guide because these plants are becoming very popular right now. We're seeing a lot more varieties of these plants hitting the market, and we're going to be seeing even more over the next 6 to 12 months. And recently I was looking up to see kind of what information was out there on the internet about these plants, and a lot of it is inaccurate. So I was like, I gotta make this care guide for people today so that they are getting the right information on how to take care of these gorgeous plants. Now, I will be showing you the Schismatoglottis that I own here in a bit, but up until now, most of the time when you heard somebody say they owned a Schismatoglottis, the one they owned is what is called a Wallichii, and this is what it looks like. Now, we are seeing these pop up a lot more readily in local plant stores right around now, so you are likely to see this one a lot. But like I said, there are other varieties that are coming up, including the one that I own, which I will show you here in a second. But I want to start off talking about the growth pattern for these plants and kind of where they come from, their natural environment, and what you can expect when bringing them into your home. So Schismatoglottis plants are actually aroids, but they're non-vining aroids. And I like to think of them kind of as like a cross between Alocasia and Aglaonema. And I will let you know right now that I have seen Schismatoglottis plants mislabeled in stores as Aglaonemas, so just be on the lookout for that. So much like alocasias, every leaf that comes in on a Schismatoglottis plant will then produce another new leaf from that leaf, another new leaf from that new leaf, and so on and so forth. However, they are not grown from corms like alocasia. They are what are known as clumping plants, which is similar to Aglaonemas. So in addition to getting those new leaves from each leaf, over time you will discover whole new clumps of leaves coming up out of the soil. So it does expand outwardly quite rapidly as well. At least in my experience, it is a very fast growing plant. But as with all plants, how fast your plant grows is going to be greatly impacted by how much light you're giving it. So let's talk about light next. So Schismatoglottis plants really like medium to bright indirect light. That is their ideal light. However, I have had my plant living in front of a north-facing window directly in the window its entire life, and it has loved it there. And most people would call that a lower lighting situation. But if I wanted to, I could put it in a brighter location. It would probably grow even faster than it's been growing. But as always, I just want to remind you guys that when you're putting your plants into brighter light, just make sure that you acclimate them slowly. If you see any signs of leaf burn or paling of the leaves, that's usually a good sign that it's getting too much light, and you might want to pull it back a bit until you find that sweet spot where it's the happiest. But let's move on to watering, because watering is one of the most important things I feel like with this plant if you want it to thrive. And these plants are native to Borneo and some surrounding regions of Borneo, and so they're used to a very, very wet tropical environment. So these plants do not like to dry all the way out at all. Now, good news is these plants are also extremely vocal. So if you go even slightly, like say maybe an hour too long past watering that plant, it will start to wilt on you like this, very, very fast. The leaves will all kind of droop down, and you will know for sure that it is time to go in and give that plant a good watering. So typically, I don't let mine dry out more than probably ever max halfway. And of course, if I see that drooping happening before then, I will definitely go in and hit it with that watering can. But you have to be a little bit careful as well about not watering this plant too soon. And normally when I tell you guys that, I say it's because the plant is prone to root rot. This plant actually, I think, is fairly resistant to root rot. It really does like a lot of moisture, and the roots seem to be okay with that. In the case of this plant, it's not the roots that are the issue if you water it too soon. It's the fact that this plant is very prone to guttation. And if you don't know what guttation is, this is something I briefly touched on in a previous video regarding alocasias. So most of my plants in my home don't do a lot of gutating, and I'll explain what gutating is here in a second. But my alocasias definitely do it. They're the most prone to it, but this plant is even more prone to it. So if you accidentally water this plant too soon, what it will do is it will try to adjust the fact that there's too much moisture around its roots by pushing that moisture up to the leaves and then expelling it out through the leaves. And guttation primarily happens overnight, so often what will happen is you will go to bed, your plant will look fine, you'll wake up the next morning and it's got wet, mushy leaves and water dripping off of it. And that is a sign that you had given it too much water too soon, it hadn't dried out enough, and it's just trying to figure out how to expel that water. Now, because guttation does tend to happen more overnight, it is also a good idea to always try and water your Schismatoglottis earlier in the day so that it has a chance to use up any potential excess water before nighttime rolls around. But if you do accidentally water your plant too soon, it is not the end of the world, but you might end up with some leaves that are looking not so great. So let me show you my Schismatoglottis, and I will flash up on screen for you what I think the variety of this is. This was actually mislabeled as a Wallichii when I bought it. It clearly is not, so this is what I think it is, but still a beautiful plant, but I accidentally watered it too soon earlier this week. And so you can see here, first of all, look at these beautiful leaves with this kind of grayish, camouflage-ish looking patterning on it. It is gorgeous. But if you can see these leaves that look a little bit yellow on the edges, this is what will happen if your leaves get too much guttation going on. It will become mushy, and then as it dries, it'll turn yellowish and brown, and it will just stay that way, you guys. Like, it's not gonna go away. It's not gonna get any worse unless you continue to accidentally water too soon. And you know, if it bugs you, you can remove the leaves. Like I said, this plant is pretty fast growing, but you know, it doesn't bother me that much. Eventually those leaves will get older and just die off naturally anyway. But also be careful not to touch the plants too much when you have guttation happening, because that is what happened to this leaf right here. I don't know if y'all can see that, but that leaf, I touched it when I saw it was gutating, and it just like peeled off that part of the leaf, completely peeled it off, and was left with this rough edge here. But yeah, that's what happens. And like I said, it's not the end of the world. Guttation is not gonna kill your plant or anything like that. It's a natural process for plants. But if you do wake up and see wet, mushy leaves on your plants, that's typically what's happening. But let's talk about soil next, because these plants do like to stay relatively moist, but also we don't want too much water sitting around the roots. We definitely want to make sure we have a well-draining soil, but one that holds a little bit of moisture as well. So I currently have mine potted up in my forest floor mix, and if you have not seen my video on how I make my custom soil mixes, I will link that in the description down below for you, as well as at the end of this video. But because this plant is not highly prone to root rot, and because it does like a decent amount of moisture, you could also use my basic mix, which is just 5 parts premium potting soil to 1 part extra drainage, such as perlite or pumice. Now, I would like to take a moment to say that every one of these I have seen available in a store, including mine when I bought it, was potted up in a highly peat-based mixture. And it's fine because this plant is a moisture-loving plant. That's fine for like a little while, but when you do get around to repotting this plant, I would highly recommend trying to remove the majority of that soil type off of this plant's roots before you pot it up into the type of soil that we just talked about. So let's go ahead and talk about repotting, since we've already started talking about it. So you want to wait till this plant is fairly significantly root bound, and in my experience, that's not going to take long at all. Once it is significantly root bound, you are going to want to take it up 1 pot size. And like I said before, this plant is a very fast growing plant, and so apparently are its roots. So you need to definitely check this plant once a year to see if it needs to be repotted. And I want to show you what I mean about how fast growing it is. So I actually repotted this plant 2 months ago, 2 months and 3 days ago to be precise. And I did put it into a clear nursery type pot so that I could keep an eye on the roots. Now at the time I repotted it, I couldn't see any roots in that clear pot because I had just taken it up 1 pot size. And I did remove all of the old soil off of it at that point. Typically that will slow down the new root growth and everything on a plant, but not the case for this one. So let me show you how many new roots I can see in here already 2 months and 3 days later. Can you guys see that? You see all those roots in there? That is a ton of new roots already hitting the edges of this pot. So that's what I'm telling you guys about. This is a very, very fast growing plant, and luckily it seems to do well when it's root bound. So I still think you're probably good with just repotting it once a year, but because it goes that fast, you definitely want to make sure you are checking it once a year and taking it up 1 pot size if you need to. I'm going to set him back down. Now with Schismatoglottis plants, when you're repotting them, that is also the best time to do any propagation, because the easiest method of propagation for these plants is by division. So when you are repotting, if you want to break it up into multiple plants, just find a good clump of the plant to separate out, make a clean cut through those roots, pot it up on its own, and you're good to go. But let's talk about temperature and humidity for these plants next. Now, like I said, it is from a very tropical environment, so it does prefer to be kept on the warmer side, somewhere between like 60 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. You really want to try not to go below that 60 mark. If you do, like on occasion, you know, if it accidentally hits there and it's not there for too long, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you don't want to keep them under 60 for an extended period of time. And as always, try to avoid direct drafts from an AC or a heating vent, because that's going to potentially make your plant too hot or too cold. And that can also mess with your plant's reaction to the humidity in your home because it dries out the air around your plant. That is another reason why we always say to avoid those direct drafts. So when it comes to humidity, this plant is from an environment where it's probably, like, most of the time at least 60% or higher, probably like 80% or higher, but I have great news for you. This plant has adjusted way better than most of my aeroids to the humidity level in my home naturally. So during the summer months here, I've been averaging anywhere between like 40% to 50% mostly. We've had a really, really dry summer. If we had had more rain, it probably would have stayed a little bit higher. This plant's been fine, but it's also been through an entire winter in my house when we were like sometimes down in like the low 30s in terms of humidity. It was nowhere near a humidifier, and it has done excellent for me. So no matter what the level of humidity in your home is, the Schismatoglottis plant should do well for you. Now, obviously, if you give it that higher humidity, it's probably going to do even better for you and thrive a little bit more, but it will be fine in pretty much any level of humidity. But let's talk about fertilization for these plants next. So I have been fertilizing this plant more frequently during the summer because it has been growing even faster for me during the summer than it did in the winter. So right now I am fertilizing it once every 2 weeks with a balanced liquid fertilizer that has an NPK of 10-10-10. Now this plant also did continue to grow for me throughout the winter, just at a slightly slower rate. So I did back off my fertilization a little bit, and I only fertilized with that same fertilizer once per month in the winter. But basically my general rule of thumb, you guys, for fertilization is as long as your plant is still growing and putting out new leaves, keep fertilizing it. If it is growing very rapidly, fertilize it a little bit more frequently than if it has slowed down its growth a bit. And typically in the winter is when we see that growth slow down. But the plant is inside, and because it is inside our homes, typically it's going to grow year round versus what it might actually do if it was still living outside. But let's talk about my least favorite topic in these care videos next, and that is pests. And it's my least favorite topic because I just cannot stand plant pests. And I want to remind you up front that the best practice is prevention when it comes to pest control. So try to be spraying your plants down once a month with some kind of preventative spray. That is going to help keep the pests at bay. But they still might infest your plants even with all of that going on. And if you do get pests on your Schismatoglottis, the number one pest you are likely to see are spider mites. Spider mites are highly attracted to aeroids in general. Alocasias are notorious for being spider mite magnets, and Schismatoglottis are right up there as well. But the other two big pests that I feel like you're most likely to see on your Schismatoglottis plants would be mealybugs and then also thrips. So if you do find pests on your plant, just give them a good wash off, spray off if you can first to try to dislodge as many of the pests as you can. Let the plant completely dry, treat it with your pest spray of choice, and then repeat that at least one time 1 week later. I honestly would recommend doing it 2 to 3 times 1 week in between to make sure that you have eradicated all those pests and make sure that you're isolating that plant away from any other plants. And I do want to make you guys aware, in case you do have pets or young children who may not know better and take a bite out of one of your plants, these plants are unfortunately toxic to both pets and humans, so make sure you're keeping them out of paws and little hands' reach. But like I mentioned at the start of this video, I feel like this plant is gaining in popularity, and we are going to be seeing more and more varieties popping up in local plant stores. And so a few other ones in addition to the Wallichii that I showed you and mine that I showed you that I have seen popping up are the Schismatoglottis mottliana, and this one has a stripe just running straight down the middle of that leaf. Very gorgeous if you like kind of that striped look versus that mottled variegation look. And then I've also recently seen this Imperial Jade, which to me is kind of a cross between the two. It's kind of got that stripe down the middle and then some splotchiness coming out off of that stripe. And something about this one kind of reminds me a little bit of the Caladium Hilo Beauty as well, just a little bit of a smaller form plant, because those Caladium Hilo Beauties can get very large. Let me tell you, I own one. It's taken up a lot of space. But that is another thing I really like about these plants is they are very structural, very beautiful, but they also stay relatively narrow, and you can keep them trimmed as narrow as you need them to be. But they are just beautiful, beautiful plants. Absolutely love them. I'm so happy that they are gaining in popularity, and I hope that this video has helped you out today if you've recently acquired a beautiful Schismatoglottis plant or were considering buying one. If so, please be sure to hit that like and or subscribe button down below, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!